Alright, hello, welcome to the channel. What's up? Hope you're having a good day. Today I want to talk about the classic, the historic fly movies. So if you are aware, there were two classic movies about the fly. One was made in 1958 and the remake was made in 1986. They both had decent, good actors in it. And the Fly remake, it's a historic actor who's now a prominent figure in Hollywood. At the time, he was just a typical actor then. Now that actor from the Fly movie, he's a prominent player in Hollywood. I'll let you do the research so you can find his name and you can watch that Fly remake of 1986 if you already haven't made it. Alright, so I'm going to discuss right now some of the similarities those two movies had in common. One similarity that they had in common, 1958 and 1986, that both men were phenomenal, genius level intellect. They both made a historic, original science fiction device that transported matter from one location to another location. Since that movie came out in 1958, I believe Star Trek with its transporters got the idea of matter transference from that 1958 Fly movie. Because remember, Star Trek came out in 1960s. I'm talking about a movie that the Fly original came out in 1958, and it used that transporter technology that is so common. It just basically using just the Star Trek movies. So like I said, those two men in both eras, they was phenomenal genius and gifted intellects. They basically had no rivals in their time period. That's the first thing they had in common. Number two, both of those men were goal driven. As you know, most prominent scientists who are alive today, they seem to be very goal driven. Those two actors, they would spend a huge amount of time perfecting the technology for their particular transporter device. So that's number two. The next thing they both use pods. Now, in 1958, the genius, the main character, he had two different types of pods. His first two pods was about the size of a shoebox. With that shoebox size pod, he moved like simple things around, like a pencil, an ashtray. If you watch the movie, he moved the ashtray around. So he had with those pods. In 1986 remake, it was just one big pod. It was one big pod, and they looked heavy too. And in 1958 version, the pods, they look like anybody can carry them. Like I said, it was one pod originally, the size of a shoebox. It looked light. It was basically made of glass and light metal. Later on, when he perfected his technique, he made his pods to be able to transport like a human-sized figure. So, I believe, well, maybe the guy in 1958, he probably was a little bit more smarter because he did use two different types of pods. So he really was an expert at his technology because he made that small shoebox-sized pod and that large pod. 1986, it was just one big pod, and that was it. It did everything. Next, like I said, they used test animals on their figures. But here's the main difference. You know, in 1958, special effects wasn't as innovative and believable as they are today. So in 1958, his first organic test subject was his, now this is so cruel He know that thing. The part wasn't perfected. He used his own house pet, his own cat, as a test subject. That's a form of cruelty right there. That's a form of severe cruelty. You know your device is not perfected. So why use an animal that you love for that? And when he did transport his cat, I guess it was in another world. It never reappeared, but you can hear it meowing and all over, like in that basement area. And then he said, eventually the atoms of the cat would just disperse and it just go everywhere. And in 1986 remake, it was more gruesome when he did an organic subject. Now I forgot what he used, but I did remember he used a little test subject. Maybe it was a mouse, a guinea pig, whatever. But at least it was not attached to him like that 1958 version of his cat. 1986, he was not attached to that animal. It was just a test subject. But when he used that part on it, and it reappeared in the other part, it was not a pretty sight. I just leave it up to your imagination. Say the animal looked like spaghetti. It was whole in one part. When it reappeared in the second part, it came out looking like spaghetti. And the producers of the movie, they did not hold anything back. They trying to make it look as believable as possible. Another thing they had in common, that they used women to help them, do out their endeavors. But I will say this, I did like the 1958 version, the woman who helped him, because that woman, she was the man's actual wife. She had an investment in him. She had an ongoing relationship that lasted at least several years. In 1986, it was no real relationship. The woman who met the scientist was just a reporter. She never met him a day in his life. The only time she met him when she came to interview him about his technology. And you know how Hollywood like to speed things up. 2 weeks later, or a week later, they was in bed with each other. So, 1986 version, there was no deep romantic tie with each other. It was basically like a quick 1 night, 2 night stand. So that's the similarities. Now I'm going to talk about how those two movies differed. As I said earlier, a few seconds ago, one major difference between those movies, in 1958, that inventor, that genius, he had a family. He had a wife, he had his son, and it showed his brother. So that movie in 1958, it was more family based. It was more family oriented. The man in that movie had a life. He had people who clearly loved him. He had people who he was attached to. Like I said earlier, he had his own house pet, his cat. He had a cat. If you look at the movie in 1986, it seemed like that inventor meets the typical stereotype. A person who's quirky, goofy, by himself. He was basically a loner. It seemed like he had nobody who cared for him. The only person who cared for him was that reporter who came to interview him, and she only knew him about 2 weeks. Other than that, we did not see his mother, his father, his brother, sister, no one. He was basically in the world by himself. So you felt, at the end of the movie, you felt more sorry for the 1986 version than the 1958 version, because the 1986 version, he had no one who cared about him. When he died, we don't know if anyone even cried over his death. In 1958, we know, if you look at that movie in 1958, we know people remorse when that inventor passed away. People were sad. His wife was traumatized by his death. Not so in 1986. 1958, the wife killed her husband because he got transformed into the fly. He wanted his wife to kill him. In 1986, the lady had to kill him. She had to, because when you look at the 1986 version, it could not fit in society anymore. She had to kill him. He was losing his mind. He was going insane. She had to pick up the gun and blow his brain out. She had to do it. But she cried. Both ladies cried for him. Alright, another thing that was different. Now, the 1986 version, he was not the benefactor of that invention. He did not own it. He was working for a company. And for that 1986 version, it had a remake where it had a follow-up about that. But you check out the follow-up. It's called Fly 2. But in 1986, he did not own that device. He was the inventor, but it was owned by some other large corporation. 1958 version, that man, he made the device because he loved it. It was truly his device. When he died, he burned, when he transformed into a fly, he burned up all the papers so no one can ever replicate what he did. In 1986 version, there was some notes on his device, but when he passed away, no one knew how to actually use it. So they do share similarity in that regards. When both inventors died, no one knew how to use the device. But in 1986, the device was still there. 1958, he destroyed everything. No one had his devices. No one had his notes. In 1986 version, the man was such a genius, nobody could interpret his notes. His devices were still there, but his intellect was so vast that the scientists of his era, they didn't know what to make of his notes. Alright, now, as I said earlier, the 1986 version, he was more of a loner. 1958 version, he was more of a family man. You could relate to him more. He can walk outside and you can talk to him. So I give the 1958 version a little heads up because it brought you more into the story. You got to get an idea what type of man he was. It did a lot of flashbacks of how he was relating to his family. Alright, one thing too, since you know one was made in 1958, the other one's made about 30 years later, you know it was a huge digital effects disparity between them. In 1958, digital effects was like on a lower totem pole. 1986, it became cutting edge technology. So 1986 version, it does look more better. His transformation toward the fly, it looks more believable compared to 1958. It was more low tech. It didn't look so believable. 1986, it looked like it was a true genetic bonding of him and that fly. It looked far more believable. He was taking on, in 1986, he began to take on attributes of the fly. He still has some of his human, his human attributes, but since he joined with that fly, it becoming equally a human and a fly, equally. He was developing unique, superhuman-like abilities. So I give the edge to the 1986 version because it had more technology. It had you more on the edge of your seats. It was more about, even though it was a science fiction movie, it was border edge horror movie because what had happened to that inventor as the movie progressed. How they died? Yeah, both of them died, but they died in two different ways. I'll leave it up to you to look at those movies to find out how each inventor died. I'm not going to give no spoilers. And, like I said, the 1958, it had a better supporting cast. It had many other people involved. The inventor had a son, like I said. He had a wife, like I said. He had a brother-in-law, like I said. He had people who worked in his house who you saw on an ongoing basis. 1986, there was no huge supporting cast. It was basically that inventor and that reporter for the sci-fi magazine. There was other slight figures around, but they only appeared in one shot, like when he went to the restaurant. It was only two major characters, the inventor and his alleged girlfriend. 1958, it was a lot better. It was a more believable story. He had a real life. And so, those are my takes on the 1958 version of The Fly and the 1986 version of The Fly. I hope you get the time to view both and make your own unique comparisons. If you like my little comments, please give me a thumbs up. If you would like to hear future content, I'm happy if you subscribe to the channel. Y'all have a wonderful day. Take care.